Hey everybody, welcome to the video. In this video we're going to talk about Node.js, which is a technology that has been added to Max in the 8th release. So let's start with a premise. I am by no means a Node.js expert. I'm just learning, and I thought as I learn I can share with you what I learned. So let's see what is Node.js. Node.js is a way that we have to basically run JavaScript code outside of a browser. So it is used mostly to create a web servers. So you can use JavaScript on a server side to write an application, which then will serve your client. So what we are going to see in this video is how to access a web API using Node.js. And let's note that this thing could be already done with JS inside Max before, but we are going to do it with Node because so we get a bit more familiar with Node inside Max. Now, what does it mean to access an API? It means that we are going to use what is called an AJAX, AJAX request to ask to our website to give us some data. Now, in this video, we are going to look at this website called metaweather.com, which has a free accessible API, which means that you don't have to register to the website to access the API, you don't have to provide some information about yourself, you just can access it freely. And this API gives us some data about weather in all the world. So it's pretty cool, I think. And the coolest thing is that you don't have to register to access this data. So what is an API actually? An API is literally an application programming interface, so it's basically an interface that this website gives us, the user, to access its own content. Okay, so we can retrieve some content from this website, and a lot of other websites do that, like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, they all have an API. The API from Twitter I covered also in another tutorial. But this website allows us to get some weather data. Okay, so let's see how we can access the data from this website. Now, first of all, we need to create a node object. So the node object is called actually node script. It's called node script, which requires the name of a file, otherwise it will not work. So I already created a file, a JS file, in a folder where this patch resides. So this patch resides in this folder called node test, in which I also have a node test.js file, which is this file here. Now, what I need to do is to give to this node the name of the file. Since they are in the same folder, it will just automatically load it in. That's it. We need also another object to debug, which is called node debug. Then we connect it to the node on the right outlet, and we see we basically have this will give us kind of a console for the JS code inside the node. So if there is an error, it will notify us in this window. So if we create a message box and we write inside script start, this will actually make our node code execute. And if we say script stop, the node code will stop. Will stop running. Okay. So let it start, actually. And let's go inside the actual code. Let me make this bigger. Okay. The first thing we have here is a declaration of a constant, which means that it cannot be reassigned. So this variable called max API cannot be reassigned. And this variable contains basically the max API, which means all the functions that are implemented from Second74, or the JS function, that are relative to the max API. For example, if we say something like max API.post ciao, this will output on the console the word ciao. So let's try to start. Exactly. You will see that this outputs the word ciao on the Max console. And this function is not a Node.js built-in function. This comes from the Max API. So this is something that we can access by declaring a Max API variable. Okay, then what we have here is a variable called XML Httprequest. Let's actually call it XHTTP for a brevity's sake. And this is what will allow us to make the request to the website to get the weather data. So this is an object that has some properties and some functions which allow us to make this request to the weather website. Now this package doesn't exist already inside our computer, we have to install it in the folder. In order to do that, we have to create a message, write script npm install XML HTTP request. Now the npm is the Node package manager, which allows us to download the packages from the internet, add it inside the current folder in which we are working in, and in this way add some functionalities to our Node code. So in this case we are going to download the XML HTTP request package that we need to perform this request. Okay, so I connect it to Node, I do that, and you can see that it will download this folder in which we have the necessary stuff, and also it will create a JSON with the specifics for the package, also a log. Well, this stuff we don't actually care about. So okay, the package is installed and now we can use the XHTTP. Okay, so now what I will do is to get the URL for our website. So let's go inside the website here. You can see that it tells you the methods. So the methods from the API. Now location search. This allows us to search for a location, which means a city, and will give us all this stuff. The title, which is the name of the city, the location type, so if it's a city, a region, and so on, the latitude and the longitude, and then an integer, which is where on earth ID, and a distance in meters, which is, I don't know, gives us some distance from something. Okay, so let's get this URL, and let's copy it here, but we also need actually the full website URL, so we just have to delete this stuff. So our URL will be something like this. HTTP as the name of the website, then .com, and then /API/location search query, and then we actually want to delete that because this is the name of the city we are going to look for. Okay, now let's add a method to this node file, so a function that we can trigger from the max patch that will allow us to do actually the real search. So let's write max API add handler, which basically means add an handler to a function inside the code that we can access from outside from the max patch. And this needs the name of our function, something like make a request, very banally, and then we can write something like this, function, and then the brackets. And for example, let's see if this works. Let's say max API outlet, which will output something from the outlet of Node, and let's output this is output. Let's save. Let's go on our max patch. Let's start the script. Okay, and let's try to call this function. So this works like the JS object. We have to write the name of this function and send it as a message to the node. And oh, it's not make stuff, of course. It's make a request. So let's see. Oh yeah, of course we have to attach a message box here to see if there is any output. And yeah, it seems that it works. So we successfully created an handler, and then we declared on place. We declared this function on place as an argument to this add handler method here. So basically we have this function that we can access from Max. There is also another syntax to write a function in place, which is to use the arrow operator. So it's something like that. You can use either that or the other. So let's see. Yeah, okay. You can use either that or the other syntax, doesn't really matter. If you have to write some arguments for this function, you will write them inside those parentheses. So let's actually write the code to perform the AJAX request. Let's write its HTTP, so our object that contains the code for and the methods for the request. We write open. Now the first parameter of this function is the word get, which is the type of the request we are going to perform. So get, because we are going to get some data, and then actually the URL, and then actually a flag which is true or false, which means if this function must be executed in a synchronous way or in an asynchronous way. Now the cool thing about Node is that it can execute this type of function, so this communication with the internet, in an asynchronous way, so asynchronous, which means that it will not stop the execution of the file until it gets a result from this request, but it will keep going on with executing the code even if it still didn't complete the request. So if we write true here, it will execute the request in an asynchronous way, and if we will write false, it will execute it in a synchronous way. So it means it will wait that it gets all the data from the website before going on. Now for the moment this doesn't really matter, so let's keep it to true. And then we have to write http.send, which means we have to actually send this request that we just opened. Okay. Now we have to write what happens if the request is fulfilled. So we have to write its HTTP on ready state change. We have to assign a function to that property, and this function will be executed every time the state of the HTTP object changes. So we have to check now that the request went in a good way. So to check that, sorry for the copy paste, but I just get this from the internet. So if this ready state is equal to 4 and this status is equal to 200, it means that everything went good. Now this variable here refers to this xHTTP object. So we could also write something like HTTP. This would be the same because it refers to the object that actually calls this function, okay? Now about this keyword there will be a lot to talk. If you're interested, of course, you can look it on the internet. There's plenty of useful sources to learn about it. But what we need to know is that it refers to the object that calls the function. So if the ready state of this object is equal to 4 and the status of this object is equal to 200, it means that the request went good. So, for example, we can post what we got from the website on the console. So let's post it, and this will be, let's actually create a variable. So let's use the let keyword, which will create a variable that is valid only in this scope in which we declare it. So and let's write like response equal to this response text. Okay, and then let's output the response. Okay, cool. Now this should work. The only thing that we are missing here is actually the name of the city we want to look for. So this we have to add it as an argument to the function, and then concatenate, so append the name of the city to the URL. So for example, if I copy this URL here and I go on the internet and I write like Berlin, this will give us exactly what we're going to get from inside Max. Okay. So, okay, so this will append the name of the city to the URL, exactly as we did on the browser. Okay, so let's go inside Max and let's call this function with an argument. So let's start the script. It's not a function. Oh yeah, so this is clearly not a function because I actually never declared an xHTTP object. So actually, let's do it correctly. let's call this it's a XML. I'm super bad with that. XML Httprequest. This is actually the class, the code from the class, and now let's declare an actual object from this class. So we have to use the new keyboard and declare an object from this class in this way. Let's actually make it. Capital XML. Okay. So this is actually was not an object, an instance from this class, from the code from XML Httprequest code. We can see it as a class, and I actually never created an instance from this class. I was just using the class itself, so of course it wouldn't work. So let's see if it now works. It seems to work. So what we are getting here is a little JSON containing the data for the weather. No, not really the weather, just the location, the latitude, longitude, and an ID for the city of Berlin. So let's actually, if we pass this out on the output, so max up, instead of post we write outlet. I believe this will be output, let's start the script. I believe this will be output as a string. This is a string. When it first takes the request takes the response, so this response text is a string. Now we don't want a string, we actually want a JSON to work with. So we have to do something called parse this JSON string that we receive. So we have to use the function parse inside the JSON object. So let's do something like this. Now if we do the same, if we perform the same request again, you will see that it gives us a dictionary. Let's actually write auto start on that, so yeah, I don't have to restart the node every time. But as you can see, it's crashing. So see you in a second. Let me reopen the program and see you in a second. So there we are again, and I managed to write the auto start flag. So I don't have to write every time, I don't have to press every time the script start message. The node object will automatically update the code, I believe, every time I save. And we start executing the code every time I save inside the Visual Studio editor. So if we connect an actual dictionary to that, to the output here, we can actually see that the dictionary displays the file in the correct JSON way. Let's delete that. So now if we want, for example, to get the location, so the latitude and the longitude of the city, it's very easy. So we simply have to write response and then lat long. This we can see it from the API explanation here. So we can see that we have a lat long field. We can actually also see it if we print again this response on the console of Max. So let's do it again. We can see that this is actually an array. So we get an array that contains some data for this city. And why is an array? Because it could be also more cities. Because, for example, if I write like sun without specifying San Diego or some other sun, then I get a lot of different cities. And these are all inside this array of objects. Okay. So what I want to do, if I want to print only the first one, like is the case for example, for Berlin. So it doesn't update my code. I think there is actually another attribute to automatically update the code, which is watch. Exactly. So actually we have to write watch. Let me stop the node because I think this was the problem. So watch one. Exactly. Okay. So now every time I modify the code here, it will actually update the node object. Okay, so let's clean here. Let's make this request. Now you can see this is not an array anymore. This is just a single object, which is good. This is what we want. So what we have to do is to get the first entry of this array. Let's actually create another variable, call it first entry, which is equal to response 0. So the first entry in this array, the first object in this array of cities, and then we can write entry lat long. So this will be the location. Oops, there is an error. No. Oh yeah, there is an error. Entry is not defined. Oh, sure, this is called first entry, not just entry. So this will give us the latitude and longitude of the city that we requested, which in this case is, for example, Berlin. Now this is also a string, I believe. We can use like the from symbol object. This will give us the numbers as numbers. Yeah, so these now are two numbers separated by a comma. Okay, and this was actually a string. Okay, so now we got, for example, the latitude and the longitude. Let's actually now get the weather that we have inside the city. So to get the weather is a bit a thing. We have to actually make another request with the index, so the id of the location. So let's copy that. Let's create another URL. So URL weather, and this is also, we have to copy also the first part of the website here, and this id we actually will input it manually. So once we get a location, we have to actually put the ID of this location into another request. Okay, so let's to get the ID, we have to go. If we check it, there is a id property of this object. So we have to get this property. And for example, instead of let's just post it. So max_api.post first entry, and then id. So where on earth ID. Let's clean here, and let's do another request. Okay, so where on earth ID is this number here, 63, and so on. We have to use this to do another request to the website to get the weather. So now we need to do another request. The problem is that every time we make a request, it will always execute this code, because the onReadyState change is always the same function. So every time we do a request to get the city, it will execute this code, and it will execute it also if we get a request to the other URL. So we cannot actually have this code inside this function. What I will do is actually just to return. No, we cannot return from that, because this is kind of a callback. So let's create another variable and call it response. And then let's say response is equal to the parsed JSON. Okay. So now what we have to do is to send another request after we get the URL ID. So we can do something like that. Response. Let's say let who on earth ID is equal to response. Let's actually do something like that. Let's actually return the first element on this array as we did before. So we will not return an array, but a single object. So response is a single object. So response where on earth ID. So this will be the ID of the city we are looking to get the weather from. Okay, the only problem with that is that now this request is asynchronous, which means it could also execute this request and assign the VUID. Let's actually do it. So let's actually do it and see what happens. Cannot read property VUID of undefined. That's because the request has been called, but the where on earth ID has been assigned before the request was completed. And this is because this is executed is in asynchronous mode, as we saw before. So to prove that, let's for example post here I finished, and let's see if this gets printed And let's print here also API post. Still running. Now you see sometimes I put the double quote, sometimes I put the single. It doesn't really, at this point it doesn't really matter. It's the same, you can consider it to be the same. Okay, so yeah, there was an error. The debug gives us, it tells us that there was an error. So let's see which actually prints first. So still running, is still printing. Let's actually comment this out to see also the other post. So still running, I finished. So basically, this variable gets assigned before the request has been completed, and this is because it gets executed in asynchronous mode, which means it will not block the code until the request is completed, but it will keep it running. So what we can do to prevent that is to make this execute in synchronous mode. Now, I'm sure there is a better way to do that, but in this case, we actually really need the request to be completed before running the rest of the code. So actually, let's set this to false, which means it will wait until the request is completed to execute the rest of the code. So okay, now we have our ID for the city. Now we have to make another request, so let's open it. The method is always get. And now we need the URL weather, URL weather, plus the ID that we just retrieved, plus where on earth ID. We also need another one of these characters. So we append the ID and then this character here. Okay, and then let's send again the request. Let's send this new request. And then let's actually print on the console what we got. So the response will this function here will execute it another time, and the response will be different. So let's print the response when this request is finished, and then let's print it a second time here. So let's clean that up and let's see. Wrong, something wrong, because we didn't set the flag here. Let's also set this to false. So everything is executed in synchronous mode. So okay, the second request it's never going to finish. So let's check why. Oh yeah, I think because actually we don't get an array the second time. The second time we just get a single object. So actually this getting the first element of the array, we just do it the first time. Okay, because the second time this is not an array. This is just a single object. So let's try again. Oh yeah. So after a bit of time we get a big object which contains actually a property called consolidated weather, which is an array of the weather for the next days. Okay, you can see the date here, applicable date, the 26th of November. Now it's the 23, so it will be for the next 3 days. Pretty cool. So for example, from that we can know the max temp for sure, the minimum temperature, and the current temperature. So let's do that. Let's get the temperature data from today. So what I will do is something like that. Now we have the new response. And let's create a variable. Let's create a set of variables actually, like min temp, max temp, and temp, which is the temp at the moment. Let's not assign them to anything. And then let's say min temp is equal to response, and then there is this property here called consolidated weather. We can also access it like that. So consolidated no, how is it written? I think like that. Consolidated weather, and then we want to get the first entry dot. So because this is an array, the first element of this array, and we want to get the minimum temperature. So minimum, how is this written? Min with underscore temp. So min underscore temp. Okay, And let's see what we get out of that. So max api.outlet min temp. Let's see what we get, if we get really the minimum temperature or not. Let's try. Oh yeah, that's pretty cool. Let's actually write here min temp, and then let's put a space. Oops. Mismatching here. Okay. Plus min temp, so we can actually root this out in Max with we can root this out with a root object. So root min temp. Let's see what we get out of here. Let's see if we really get something. Let's see actually what we get out of the whole thing. What out of the root? Okay, yeah. So this worked. We get the. Did it work? Let's actually do it again. No, this doesn't work because this is actually a string, so root doesn't really work. We have always to use the from symbol object, which will transform the list in the string in a list, and now we get the actual minimum temperature. So okay, I think you get the idea. Let's get the maximum. Let's get the max temperature. So instead of min temp, we write max temp. And we write max temp here, max temp there. And we can root from here the maximum temperature. So let's get the maximum temperature. And it's undefined. Why is this undefined? Because I copied that like that, which was actually with a underscore. So let's do it again. And as you can see, the maximum temperature is 3.28 degrees Celsius, so pretty cold, It's damn cold here in Berlin, guys. Okay, but I think you got the idea. Let's say we want to get the temperature in the next, for tomorrow. Instead of writing 0 here, I will just write 1. Let's see, what do we have tomorrow? And we have -1 and 4. It's a bit warmer. But okay. Cool thing is that you can use these values to do whatever you want in your patch. Okay, now I hope this was not too messed up, and I encourage you to study a bit of Node. Online is full of resources, of course, like for everything, and I encourage you to study a bit about it because it's really a cool tool that can be used for a lot of stuff. But guys, hope this was useful. And as always, if you want to support me, you can go on my Patreon page, link in the description, of course, and you can get a lot of patches and you would support me. Okay, guys, so this will be it for today. See you in the next video. Ciao.